Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance watching the stars through the main view screen when everything changed forever. The deep space scanner showed something impossible moving toward them at incredible speed. Lieutenant Sarah Davis called out from her station that the object was slowing down and appeared to be artificial. Jake felt his heart race as he realized humanity was about to meet its first alien visitors. The alien ship was massive and beautiful, with smooth silver surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. It was 3 times larger than the Defiance and clearly built by minds that understood technology, far beyond human capabilities. Communications Officer Peter Rodriguez received the first message, which came through in perfect English, somehow translated by their advanced systems. The voice was calm and polite but carried an unmistakable tone of authority. "Commander." Veltar introduced himself as the leader of this Zephyrian exploration fleet and representative of the great Zephyrian Empire. He explained that his people had been watching humanity for some time and were impressed by human progress but concerned about their violent tendencies. The Zephyrians had brought peace and order to 47 different worlds across the galaxy and now offered the same gift to Earth. Jake listened carefully while Dr. Lisa Harper, the ship's science officer, recorded every word. The alien commander spoke about his empire with obvious pride, describing how they had eliminated war and suffering from dozens of civilizations. Each world that joined the empire received protection, advanced technology, and guidance from their superior knowledge. In return, these worlds contributed their resources and followed Zephyrian law, which had proven successful across many different species. Veltar made it sound like a generous offer from benevolent rulers who only wanted the best for primitive species like humans. Dr. Harper asked careful questions about this process and learned that the Zephyrians always followed the same pattern when encountering new civilizations. First, they would demonstrate their overwhelming technological superiority through displays of power. Then they would offer membership in their empire with all its benefits. Finally, they would give the new species exactly 72 hours to make their decision. Veltar explained that this timeline had proven optimal for allowing proper consideration, while preventing unnecessary delays. The demonstration of power came next as Veltar's ship easily disabled the Defiance's weapons and engines without causing any permanent damage. The alien technology made human military systems look like stone tools in comparison. Engineering Chief Robert Newman worked frantically to restore power, while reporting that their most advanced equipment had been neutralized by forces they could not even detect or understand. The message was clear that resistance would be futile against such superior capabilities. Veltar then transmitted detailed information about the choice facing humanity. If Earth accepted membership in the Zephyrian Empire, they would receive immediate access to advanced medical technology that could eliminate most diseases. Their energy problems would be solved with clean, unlimited power sources. Space travel would become safe and routine with Zephyrian navigation systems. Most importantly, Earth would be protected from any hostile aliens that might threaten human civilization in the future. The alternative was equally clear, though Veltar presented it with regretful necessity rather than threat. If humanity refused this generous offer, the Zephyrian Empire would be forced to treat Earth as a potential danger to galactic peace. Their military doctrine required eliminating civilizations that rejected peaceful integration, since such species inevitably became aggressive toward their neighbors. Veltar assured Jake that this was not their preferred outcome, but sometimes primitive species made unfortunate choices. Jake maintained his composure during the conversation, but inside he felt a cold anger building. The alien spoke about humanity like they were children who needed adult supervision. Veltar's tone suggested that humans should be grateful for this opportunity, and that refusing would be both stupid and ultimately pointless. The Zephyrian commander clearly expected Earth to accept. Immediately once they understood the situation properly, Dr. Harper requested permission to transmit this information to Earth for consideration by human leadership. Veltar agreed graciously and even provided a detailed breakdown of their standard integration process. New member worlds typically experienced a brief adjustment period, while Zephyrian administrators helped establish proper governmental structures. Local leaders who cooperated were usually allowed to maintain ceremonial positions, while real decisions were made by experienced Zephyrian officials. The transmission reached Earth within hours and caused immediate chaos in every government and military headquarters around the world. Admiral Kate Sullivan received the message at Central Command and immediately called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council. World leaders who had spent decades arguing about territorial disputes and trade agreements suddenly found themselves united by a common threat that made all previous conflicts seem insignificant. President Maria Santos spoke for many world leaders when she declared that humanity had not struggled through thousands of years of history just to become pets in an alien zoo. The offer of advanced technology was tempting, but the price was everything that made humans human. Admiral Sullivan began immediate preparations for what everyone knew was coming while hoping desperately that they were wrong about human nature. Back on the Defiance, Jake found himself thinking about his hometown and the people who had raised him to believe that freedom was worth any sacrifice. His grandfather had fought in 3 different wars and always said that some things were more important than staying alive. Dr. Harper ran calculations on their slim chances of survival while communications Officer Rodriguez maintained contact with the increasingly desperate communications from Earth. Veltar seemed genuinely puzzled by the delay in Earth's response. His experience with 47 other civilizations had taught him that most species accepted integration quickly once they understood the benefits and consequences. A few required the full 72 hours to overcome their initial fear, but none had ever seriously considered rejecting such an obviously superior offer. He began reviewing human history, trying to understand what made this species different from all the others, the 72. Our deadline approached like an approaching storm while Earth's leaders made their decision. Every military base on the planet went to maximum alert. Civilian populations were warned to prepare for possible attack, while knowing that no preparation could be adequate. Admiral Sullivan looked at the deployment orders that would scatter humanity's small space fleet against impossible odds and wondered if courage was just another word for stupidity. Commander, Veltar waited patiently for humanity's inevitable acceptance while his crew prepared integration protocols that had worked successfully on dozens of worlds. None of them suspected that they had just encountered the one species in the galaxy that considered freedom more important than survival and would prove that some flames cannot be extinguished, no matter how much water you pour on them. The 72 hours ended with Earth's answer delivered by Admiral Kate Sullivan herself in a transmission that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. She looked directly into the camera and spoke words that made Commander Veltar's confidence waver for the first time in his long military career. Humanity rejected the Zephyrian offer completely and would defend their freedom with everything they had. The die was cast and there could be no turning back from what was coming. Veltar immediately called for his battle fleet, which had been waiting just outside the solar system for this unlikely but possible outcome. 200 Zephyrian warships moved toward Earth with overwhelming firepower that should have ended any resistance within hours. The commander felt genuine sadness that these humans had chosen extinction over the peace and prosperity his empire offered. Their destruction would serve as a lesson to other primitive species about the consequences of rejecting Zephyrian generosity. Earth's space fleet consisted of 50 ships that had been built for exploration and asteroid mining rather than military combat. Captain Jake Morrison found himself commanding a desperate defense near Jupiter's orbit, along with every other human vessel that could reach the battle zone in time. Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen coordinated the pathetic human formation, while knowing that their outdated weapons would barely scratch the alien hull plating. Everyone understood they were about to die, but nobody suggested surrender. The first battle began exactly as Veltar expected, with human ships being destroyed quickly and efficiently by superior Zephyrian technology. His battle computers predicted that human resistance would collapse when casualties reached 60%, which was the standard breaking point for most civilized species. The aliens had studied human military history and knew that even the most determined armies eventually retreated when losses became too severe to continue fighting. But something unexpected happened when the casualty count reached the predicted breaking point. Instead of withdrawing or requesting terms, the surviving human ships pressed their attack even more aggressively. Captain Morrison watched his fleet being systematically destroyed and ordered the damaged vessels to ram enemy ships rather than retreat to safe distance. The aliens found themselves dealing with suicide attacks that their military doctrine had never encountered before. Fighter pilot Sandra Williams ejected from her destroyed spacecraft, only to hijack an alien escape pod and crash it into another Zephyrian vessel. When her ship lost life support, she sealed herself in a maintenance suit and continued fighting with nothing but a welding torch. Other human pilots followed her example, turning every piece of floating debris into a potential weapon against the alien fleet. The Zephyrians began to realize they were fighting an enemy that treated death as just another tactical option. Dr. Lisa Harper monitored the battle from Earth while analyzing alien communication, patterns that her equipment could partially decode. The Zephyrian transmissions showed growing confusion as their battle computers kept revising casualty predictions upward. First, they expected surrender at 60% losses, then 70%, then 80%. When human resistance continued at 95% casualties, the alien computers began displaying error messages about impossible scenarios on Earth itself. Engineer Rob Parker led teams of technicians who worked frantically to convert civilian equipment into military hardware. Mining lasers became improvised weapons while construction vehicles were armored and fitted with missile launchers. Even when the aliens began bombing major cities, the humans kept working in underground facilities that had been hastily converted into weapons factories. Every destroyed facility was quickly replaced by 3 smaller ones hidden in different locations. Commander Veltar found himself requesting additional ships and weapons that should not have been necessary against such a primitive enemy. His military advisors assured him that human resistance was simply taking longer to break than usual, but would inevitably collapse once they understood the hopelessness of their situation. The Zephyrian commander began studying human psychology, trying to find the pressure point that would finally convince them to surrender. The orbital battle around Jupiter lasted 3 days longer than any Zephyrian military simulation had predicted possible. Human ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with improvised repairs and jury-rigged weapon systems. When conventional tactics failed, the humans began using kamikaze attacks that traded one human ship for damage to multiple alien vessels. Captain Morrison led these desperate charges, personally inspiring his crews to fight beyond all reasonable limits. Lieutenant Commander Chen discovered that damaged human ships could still cause significant problems for the aliens, even after their main weapons were destroyed. Vessels with failing engines rammed enemy formation, disrupting their careful battle plans. Ships with dead crews continued broadcasting false signals that confused alien targeting systems. Even floating wreckage became dangerous as humans rigged it with explosives that detonated when alien salvage teams tried to clear the battlefield. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces began showing in their increasingly desperate communications. Veltar's officers reported that human behavior was completely outside their experience with other conquered species. These primitives seemed to have no concept of acceptable losses or rational surrender. Every setback only made them more creative and more determined to inflict damage on their enemies regardless of the cost to themselves. Dr. Harper made a crucial discovery while analyzing captured alien technology from crashed Zephyrian fighters. Their entire military system was designed around the assumption that enemies would eventually seek negotiated peace once the cost of fighting became too high. The aliens had never encountered a species that considered survival secondary to victory and had no contingency plans for dealing with truly suicidal resistance. Engineer Parker's improvised weapons began showing unexpected effectiveness against alien shields that had been designed to stop conventional energy weapons. Human mining equipment operated on different principles that created unexpected resonance patterns in Zephyrian defensive systems. The aliens found their technological superiority diminished by human willingness to try anything regardless of how dangerous or impractical it seemed. The first phase of the war ended with the Zephyrian fleet in control of Earth's orbital space but suffering casualties that shocked the alien high command. Veltar reported that human resistance had been neutralized but requested permission to use more extreme measures against the planet's surface. His superiors granted this permission while privately wondering why such measures were necessary against a species that should have surrendered weeks ago. Captain Morrison survived the orbital battle along with fewer than 10% of the original human fleet, but instead of despair, he felt a grim satisfaction. The humans had proven that Zephyrian invincibility was a myth, and that superior technology could be overcome by superior determination. The aliens had won the first battle, but they had also learned that conquering humanity would cost far more than they had ever imagined possible. Commander Veltar stared at his casualty, reports while trying to understand what had gone wrong with his careful plans. 47 previous conquests had taught him that overwhelming force followed by generous terms would quickly end any resistance. But these humans seemed to operate by completely different rules that turned every rational military principle upside down. He began to suspect that his empire had finally encountered an enemy that could not be conquered by conventional means. Commander Veltar called for reinforcements from the Zephyrian home fleet, which tripled his available firepower and should have ended human resistance within days. The alien High Command authorized orbital bombardment of Earth's major cities, expecting immediate surrender once the humans understood that their civilization was being systematically destroyed. Instead of breaking human morale, the attacks only seemed to make the survivors more determined and more dangerous than before. Colonel Amanda Price organized underground resistance networks in the ruins of destroyed cities, while civilians who had never held weapons learned to build improvised explosives from household chemicals. The aliens discovered that bombing human infrastructure only forced the survivors to become more resourceful and adaptable. Every destroyed factory was replaced by dozens of hidden workshops scattered across the countryside where humans learned to manufacture weapons from scrap metal and electronic components. On the moon, Chief Engineer Carl Johnson supervised desperate retrofit operations that converted civilian mining ships into improvised warships using salvaged alien technology. When the Zephyrians destroyed the lunar shipyards, the humans simply built new ones inside hollowed-out asteroids where they could work without being detected. The aliens found themselves playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with an enemy that treated every setback as a learning opportunity rather than a defeat. Dr. Lisa Harper made breakthrough discoveries while studying captured Zephyrian equipment that had been recovered from crashed alien fighters. She learned that their technology relied heavily on standardized components that could be reverse-engineered and adapted for human use. More importantly, she discovered that Zephyrian military doctrine assumed all enemies would eventually seek negotiated peace once casualties reached acceptable levels according to their psychological profiles. The problem for the aliens was that humans apparently had no concept of acceptable losses when fighting for survival. Dr. Harper's analysis showed that every previous Zephyrian conquest had followed the same pattern of overwhelming force, followed by surrender negotiations. But human psychology operated on completely different principles that made traditional conquest impossible through conventional military pressure alone. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a growing fleet of hybrid ships that combined human engineering with salvaged alien technology in ways that confused and frustrated Zephyrian tactical computers. His vessels used unpredictable attack patterns that violated every principle of rational military strategy. Human pilots flew suicide missions that traded individual ships for maximum damage to enemy formations without any regard for preservation of forces or strategic withdrawal. The Zephyrians found their supply lines under constant attack from human raiders, who seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Morrison's hybrid fleet struck alien transport ships and vanished into asteroid fields where superior Zephyrian sensors could not track them effectively. Every successful raid provided more alien technology that human engineers immediately began adapting for their own purposes, with frightening creativity and speed. Engineer Carl Johnson discovered that human manufacturing techniques could actually improve certain aspects of alien technology through modifications that Zephyrian designers had never considered. Human willingness to accept higher risks allowed them to push alien equipment beyond its intended performance limits in ways that often resulted in spectacular failures, but sometimes produced unexpected breakthroughs that gave them temporary advantages. Colonel Price's resistance cells began coordinating attacks on Zephyrian ground forces that demonstrated human ability to adapt to any environment or tactical situation. The aliens controlled Earth's major population centers, but found themselves under constant harassment from enemies who treated urban warfare as an art form. Human fighters used sewer systems and underground tunnels to move undetected, while turning every building into a potential fortress or ambush point. The psychological warfare worked both ways as Zephyrian soldiers began reporting that human prisoners refused to provide useful intelligence even under extreme interrogation. The aliens discovered that humans would literally die before revealing information that might help their enemies, and seemed to view torture as just another form of combat that required endurance rather than cooperation. This level of fanatical resistance was completely outside Zephyrian experience with other conquered species. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the global defense effort from hidden command bunkers that moved constantly to avoid alien detection. Her strategic planning assumed that traditional military victory was impossible, but focused instead on making the conquest so expensive that the Zephyrians would eventually abandon their efforts. Every human death was calculated to cost the aliens multiple casualties and resources, while demonstrating that subduing humanity would take decades rather than months. Commander Veltar found himself requesting increasingly extreme measures from his superiors, who were beginning to question the wisdom of this particular conquest. The resources being devoted to subduing one primitive planet could have been used to conquer several other worlds with far less effort and casualties. But abandoning Earth would set a dangerous precedent that might encourage other species to resist Zephyrian expansion in the future. Dr. Harper's research teams made another crucial discovery about Zephyrian technology that would change the course of the war. Their equipment contained backdoor access codes that were apparently used for maintenance and remote diagnostics. Human computer specialists, led by programmer Betty Clark, began developing viruses that could exploit these security weaknesses to disrupt alien systems from the inside while remaining undetected until activated. The cyber warfare campaign began, with subtle sabotage that caused Zephyrian equipment to malfunction at critical moments during battle. Alien weapons would misfire while their targeting systems displayed false information, and their communications equipment broadcast human propaganda instead of military orders. The Zephyrians realized they were fighting an enemy that could turn their own technology against them through methods their security protocols had never anticipated. Engineer Johnson's teams began manufacturing new human ships that incorporated lessons learned from 2 years of desperate fighting against superior technology. These vessels were designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian defensive systems while maximizing damage potential, even if the ship was destroyed in the process. Human naval doctrine evolved to embrace calculated sacrifice as a legitimate tactical option that alien commanders found impossible to counter effectively. The war entered a new phase when human forces began launching offensive operations against Zephyrian positions rather than simply defending Earth. Captain Morrison led increasingly bold raids against alien installations throughout the solar system, while Colonel Price's ground forces started hunting Zephyrian patrols instead of hiding from them. The psychological impact on alien morale was devastating as they realized their enemies were no longer content to merely survive. Veltar's reports to the Zephyrian High Command became increasingly desperate as he tried to explain why a primitive species was proving so difficult to conquer. His casualties continued mounting, while human resistance showed no signs of weakening, despite 3 years of constant warfare. The alien commander began to suspect that his empire had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history, and that traditional conquest might be impossible against this particular enemy. The 3rd year of the war ended with Earth still unconquered and human forces actually gaining strength through captured alien technology and improved tactics. Admiral Sullivan's strategy of making conquest prohibitively expensive was succeeding beyond her wildest expectations. The Zephyrians controlled Earth's orbit and most major cities, but found themselves trapped in a war of attrition against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger and more dangerous with every passing month. 3 years into the war, the Zephyrian Empire faced something that had never happened in their 1,000-year history of conquest. Commander Veltar found himself fighting the first military stalemate in Imperial records while his superiors demanded explanations for why one primitive planet was consuming resources equivalent to conquering an entire star system. The alien high command began considering extreme measures that violated their own principles of civilized warfare. Veltar requested permission to use planet-killing weapons that would turn Earth into lifeless rock within hours, but his superiors hesitated for the first time. Destroying Earth would eliminate the human threat, but would also mean learning nothing about how to defeat similar resistance elsewhere. More disturbing were reports from other worlds where client species were asking uncomfortable questions about why they had surrendered so easily when humans fought so. Effectively, Admiral Kate Sullivan made the decision that changed everything when she authorized human forces to take the war beyond Earth's solar system. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a fleet of hybrid warships that combined human innovation with captured alien technology in ways that consistently surprised Zephyrian tactical computers. His mission was simple but revolutionary for human military thinking. Hunt down and destroy alien installations wherever they could be found. The first human raids against Zephyrian territory sent shockwaves throughout. The Empire, a species that had been conquered decades ago, watched primitive humans attack their supposed masters with fearless determination. Morrison's fleet struck alien supply depots and communication stations with suicide tactics that traded individual human ships for maximum damage to Imperial infrastructure. The psychological impact was enormous as other species began to question Zephyrian invincibility. Pilot Nina Rodriguez led fighter squadrons that had learned to outfly alien ships through pure aggression and unpredictability, rather than superior technology. Her tactics violated every principle of rational combat by accepting casualty rates that should have destroyed squadron morale within weeks. Instead, human pilots seemed to view death as an acceptable price for proving that aliens could be killed and that their technology could be overcome through superior determination. Dr. Lisa Harper's analysis of captured alien data revealed something that terrified the Zephyrian leadership more than human military success. Intelligence reports showed that client species throughout the Empire were beginning to organize resistance movements inspired by human example. Worlds that had been peacefully integrated for generations were suddenly questioning why they had accepted alien rule without fighting. Back on Zephyrian colony worlds, human infiltration teams led by Sergeant Danny Walsh proved that superior technology meant nothing against enemies who refused to follow conventional rules of engagement. These special forces units learned alien languages within weeks and adapted to foreign environments with frightening speed. They turned every piece of captured equipment into weapons while teaching local populations that their alien masters were not invincible gods but mortal beings who could be killed. The humans accomplished something that the Zephyrian Empire had considered impossible by turning their own client species against them through demonstration rather than propaganda. Rebellion spread across a dozen worlds as conquered peoples watched humans fight with a level of determination that made their own submission seem cowardly. The Empire found itself fighting multiple wars simultaneously for the first time in its history. Engineer Carl Johnson's manufacturing teams had perfected hybrid technology that combined the best aspects of human and alien engineering while eliminating weaknesses that Zephyrian designers had never considered. Human warships became faster and more maneuverable than pure alien designs while mounting weapons that could penetrate Zephyrian shields through resonance frequencies that exploited fundamental flaws in their defensive systems. Commander Veltar watched his empire crumbling around him as rebellion spread from world to world like a plague that his forces could not contain. The humans had done more than resist conquest. They had proven that the Zephyrian system was vulnerable to enemies who valued freedom more than safety. His requests for reinforcements were denied as Imperial forces were desperately needed to suppress uprisings. Throughout their territory, the Zephyrian High Command began receiving reports that shattered their fundamental assumptions about how civilized species should behave during military conflicts. Human prisoners of war refused to cooperate even under extreme torture, while human forces showed no mercy to captured aliens. This total war mentality was completely outside their experience with other conquered peoples who had always sought negotiated settlements. Admiral Sullivan coordinated a galaxy-wide strategy that treated the Zephyrian Empire as a single target rather than focusing only on Earth's defense. Human forces began sharing technology and tactics with rebel groups on dozens of worlds, while proving that aliens could be defeated by primitive weapons wielded with sufficient determination. The Empire's carefully maintained image of invincibility collapsed as humans demonstrated that superior technology meant nothing against superior will. Colonel Amanda Price emerged from Earth's ruins to lead a new kind of warfare that combined conventional military tactics with guerrilla operations and psychological warfare designed to destroy alien morale. Her forces proved that humans could not only survive in any environment, but could thrive under conditions that would break other species. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting enemies who treated hardship as motivation rather than discouragement. The fourth year of the war ended with human forces operating throughout Zephyrian space while Imperial control collapsed on world after world. Captain Morrison's fleet had grown from a handful of survivors into a formidable force that struck terror into alien hearts across the galaxy. The humans were no longer defending their homeworld but actively hunting their enemies wherever they could be found. Beltar's final report to the Zephyrian High Command admitted what every alien leader had come to fear. Humans represented a completely new type of enemy that could not be defeated through conventional military means. Their willingness to accept unlimited casualties while inflicting maximum damage made traditional conquest impossible. The Empire faced a choice between total war that would destroy both species or negotiated peace with primitives who had proven themselves superior. In the only currency that mattered, Dr. Harper's psychological analysis confirmed what battlefield experience had already proven. Humans possessed something that no other known species had ever demonstrated. They could not be broken by any amount of pressure or convinced to accept defeat as permanent. This mental characteristic made them more dangerous than any weapon or technology because it turned every setback into fuel for greater determination. The galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Zephyrian Empire began negotiating with the primitive humans they had expected to conquer within weeks. Other species realized that they had been wrong about the relationship between technological advancement and military superiority. The humans had proven that victory belonged to those who refused to accept defeat regardless of the odds against them, Commander. Feltar stared at intelligence reports showing human forces operating on 40 different worlds while rebellion consumed his empire from within. He finally understood that his people had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that considered freedom more important than life itself and would never stop fighting as long as a single human remained alive. 5 years after first contact, the war had transformed both species in ways that neither had expected when Commander Veltar first offered humanity membership in the Zephyrian Empire. The galaxy watched in amazement as the mighty Imperial fleet retreated from system after system, while human forces pursued them with relentless determination. What had begun as a simple conquest had become a fight for the very survival of the oldest empire in known space. The Zephyrian Empire was fragmenting as dozens of client species declared independence, while following the human example of total resistance to alien domination. Worlds that had been peacefully integrated for centuries suddenly erupted in rebellion as their populations realized they had accepted slavery when they could have chosen freedom. The Empire's carefully constructed image of benevolent rule collapsed when faced with species willing to die rather than submit. Commander Veltar found himself commanding the remnants of a once mighty fleet while watching his empire crumble around him. His forces had been reduced to less than half their original strength through constant warfare against enemies who treated every battle as a fight to the death. The alien commander finally understood what his species had missed about humans. They did not fight to win battles, but to survive as free beings. And survival had no acceptable failure condition. Captain Jake Morrison led the final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld with a fleet that represented everything humanity had learned during 5 years of desperate warfare. His ships combined human engineering with captured alien technology, while his crews had been forged into warriors who knew no concept of surrender. The battle for the alien capital world would determine whether humanity would secure lasting peace or face extinction in a final, desperate gamble. The assault began with human forces demonstrating tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare while proving devastatingly effective against enemies who expected rational military behavior. Morrison's fleet used kamikaze attacks and suicide runs that traded human ships for maximum damage to alien defensive installations. The Zephyrians found themselves defending their homeworld against enemies who considered death an acceptable price for victory. But something unexpected happened. When human forces reached the planet's surface and found themselves in position to destroy the Zephyrian capital city. Instead of demanding unconditional surrender, Morrison offered terms that shocked both species: complete withdrawal from human space, independence for all client species, and recognition of humanity as a sovereign power. The humans were offering peace when they could have demanded revenge. Dr. Lisa Harper's analysis had proven correct when she predicted that Zephyrian military Doctrine would collapse when faced with an enemy that could not be negotiated with or broken through. Conventional pressure. The aliens had built their entire empire on the assumption that all rational species would eventually seek peace once the cost of fighting became too high. But humans operated by completely different rules that made traditional conquest impossible. The Zephyrian High Command faced total collapse of their empire as rebellion spread to every corner of their territory, while human forces demonstrated that their supposedly invincible military could be defeated by primitive weapons wielded with sufficient determination. They had no choice but to accept Morrison's terms or watch their entire civilization burn around them. The negotiated peace would save both species from mutual destruction. Admiral Kate Sullivan supervised the treaty negotiations that would reshape the galactic balance of power for generations to come. The humans demanded nothing except recognition of their independence and the right of all species to choose their own destiny without interference from imperial powers. The galaxy discovered that humanity was not interested in conquest or domination, but simply refused to accept subjugation from anyone regardless of their technological superiority. Engineer Carl Johnson began the massive task of helping rebuild not only human worlds that had been devastated during the war, but also former Zephyrian territories where newly independent species needed assistance establishing their own governments. The humans shared their hybrid technology freely while teaching other races that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that no enemy was too powerful to be resisted successfully. Colonel Amanda Price emerged from the ruins of Earth to help coordinate relief efforts that demonstrated human compassion was as remarkable as human determination. The same species that had fought with suicidal ferocity against their enemies now worked tirelessly to heal the wounds of war and build a better future for all free peoples. The galaxy learned that humans could be as generous in peace as they were terrible in war. The peace treaty was signed in a ceremony that broadcast throughout the galaxy while representatives from dozens of newly liberated worlds watched humanity take its place among the free nations of space. The humans had proven that technological advancement meant nothing without the will to use it effectively, and that victory belonged to those who refused to accept defeat as permanent regardless of the odds against them. Commander Veltar asked Admiral Sullivan the question that had haunted him throughout the entire war when he finally understood what made humans so different from every other species his empire had conquered. He wanted to know how anyone could make human beings stop fighting once they had decided that something was worth defending. Her answer became legendary across the galaxy and would be remembered for generations to come. Sullivan looked at the alien commander who had learned to respect humanity through 5 years of bitter warfare and gave him the simple truth that explained everything about human nature. She told him that humans did not have an off switch that could be activated by superior technology or overwhelming force. The only way to avoid fighting humans was to make sure they were not fighting against you in the first place. The war ended, with humanity emerging as the galaxy's most respected and feared species, not through superior technology or overwhelming military force, but through the simple demonstration that they would never give up fighting for their freedom. Other races learned that humans possessed something that could not be conquered, programmed or negotiated away, an absolute refusal to accept defeat as permanent under any circumstances. And Dr. Harper's final report on human psychology became required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy as other species tried to understand what made humans so different from every other known civilization. Her conclusion was simple but profound. Humans were the only species that considered survival secondary to freedom and would literally choose death over slavery when forced to make that choice. The galaxy entered a new age of freedom as former imperial subjects established their own governments while looking to humanity as an example of what could be accomplished through determination and refusal to accept defeat. The humans had proven that no empire was too powerful to be resisted, and that victory belonged to those who never stopped fighting for what they believed in. Regardless of the cost, Captain Morrison returned to Earth as a hero who had led humanity through its darkest hour and emerged victorious against impossible odds. But he knew that the real victory was not military conquest, but the proof that human spirit could not be broken by any force in the universe. The galaxy had learned that humans possessed something more dangerous than any weapon, an absolute inability to give up when fighting for their freedom. The story ended with humanity taking its place among the free peoples of the galaxy while serving as a beacon of hope for any species that faced domination by superior technology. The humans had proven that victory was possible for anyone willing to pay the price in blood and sacrifice, while never accepting defeat as final. They had no off switch, and that made all the difference.